as you prepare the final argument research paper, I'd like for you to go back and look at the video. Watch it very carefully for the one where we talked about putting together the rough draft. Since you've submitted the rough draft, I've provided you with some feedback on what needs to be done for the final paper. Be sure that you look at that feedback very carefully to determine the setup of your paper and to be sure that everything is set up according to the guidelines that I've provided. Keep in mind that your final paper needs to be between 1,500 and 1,700 words, and that includes the entire paper, introduction all the way through works cited page. Be sure that on the final copy you underline the thesis statement and that you highlight an example of each source one time as we did on the rough draft. There's a rubric that can be found on what I'm going to use in order to grade your paper, so carefully study the rubric in order to determine that you're going to earn the score that you want to have on this final paper. Let's go back and reiterate some quick points about what needs to be done on the final paper as far as setup goes. You know that everything is double spaced all the way throughout. Your name, class, instructor, and date goes at the top. Your title must have a colon listed in it. It must have it must be capitalized with the first word and any important words within the title, and everything all the way throughout the paper is going to be double spaced all the way through until you get to the works cited page, which of course is the next page after you end the paper. Once the conclusion is finished, there should be space if there's space at the bottom of your paper, and the works cited page starts on a new page. The works cited page is placed in alphabetical order, and it is going to be using hanging indent to where the second line and any lines within that bibliography are indented, and it's going to be placed in alphabetical order according to either last name of the source or going to be the first letter in the title of the article when there's an anonymous article. We went through and we said that for each one of the sources that you have, you're going to go through and highlight an example of that source one time. Now, this particular paper had more than 5 sources, so you're going to see that there's a lot of highlights all the way throughout here, but keep in mind on the final paper that you're only highlighting each source one time. As you go through the paper, if there are any direct quotes that you've used, I want each one of the direct quotes to be bold-faced on the final document, so that way you'll know that these are the exact direct quotes that are used within the paper. Keep in mind that you should have no more than 4 direct quotes on the final paper. There should be no more than 4 direct quotes on the final paper. In the paper itself, within the body of the paper, you should have a variety of sources that are used and cited to where every paragraph is not all from the same source. Within the paragraphs, there should be at least 3 original sentences, one at the beginning, one in the middle, and then one going to be at the end of the paragraphs. Be sure that you check and be sure that you have a minimum of 3 within each one of the body paragraphs in order to maintain what it is that's the requirements. And in the conclusion, one of the things that you want to do is you want to go through and have a reworded version of your thesis statement to kind of finalize everything. Notice that in the introduction at the beginning, there's nothing cited, and in the conclusion at the end, there's nothing cited. The introduction is going to use information that is your own to introduce the topic with the thesis statement that's going to tell the side of the issue that you're on, and of course the conclusion is going to wrap up all of the details. Keep in mind that every single sentence that is within the paper has to be cited in this particular format. There has to be a name at the beginning with a page number at the end, or if there is no name in the sentence, there has to be a name and page number at the end. If by chance you have any sources that do not have page numbers, you can use this abbreviation here, in page, to show that this is where the page would go, and it sets up in the same exact manner at the end in the parentheses, or either the name and the page number set up from beginning and end. But every sentence that comes from an outside source, every piece of information that comes from an outside source has to be cited in order to be able to avoid plagiarism. Go back and double check and be sure that these page numbers, like for instance this is Chin and others, go back and be sure that when you look, these page numbers actually match what it is that's in the paper. Now keep in mind there's one thing that we did not mention on the rough draft that I need to mention here. In the bibliography, when you have ETAL, ETAL actually means and others. So when you're writing the paper, and you come across the idea that you're using the names within the sentences, you're going to see here that Chin and others is used in the sentence so that you'll be able to sit and say that I know that there were other additional people within the bibliography. So it's listed there to show that there's more than one. If by chance you actually are using Chin within the context of the sentence itself, you're going to use the and others phrase, but if you use it at the end of the sentence, you would put the ETAL within the parentheses. Now, one additional thing to make note of, there was one piece of information where we talked about in the rough draft that if you have two sources with the same name, for instance here, you see that there is Sally Driscoll and Tracy DeLacio, Sally Driscoll and Tracy DeLacio. Both of these authors have the same names, but here you see that there's two different articles by these individuals. So if we come up here and we look at the paper, you'll notice here that the way that the person set this up was to go through and put the names of the authors at the end, and then there was a shortened version of the title within the parentheses. This is only whenever you have authors with the same names that you need to do this. When you're looking at the details of what needs to be included, be sure, as we've said before numerous times, that you message me with Canvas inbox with any questions that you may have about the paper. This particular paper is going to be one of those papers that counts a significant portion of your actual grade, 30 overall percent. So be sure that you ask questions beforehand and that your paper is set up in the correct manner.